I am Radika Sivakumaran from UNICEF Sri Lanka. Mr. Kant are two key people involved in this process together with me. Today I am going to present why the participatory kit was prepared, what are the contents in it, how school-based MHM action being prepared and successes and challenges so far gathered through this process. In the next slide, I will explain where actually this research was being carried out. The research was carried out in the northern part of Sri Lanka where around 1.1 million of population are living. Majority of the community are Hindus and Hindu-related myths influencing the MHM here. The schoolgirls population here is 132,500. However, you can see in this slide that majority of the population living in south are Buddhist, and there are certainly different kinds of myths affecting the schoolgirls in the context of MHM. In the next slide, I will talk about the birth of Wins for School approach in Sri Lanka. Wins for Girls approach is under the Wash in Schools program which was launched in 2014. However, even before that, the hardware kinds of smaller interventions and availability of sanitary napkins and placement of bins at school level was addressed in certain schools. Some of the regularized activities under Wash in Schools are listed here, but I will go straight to the next slide to explain how the initial steps were under the Wins for Girls. Initially, the Provincial Department of Education had a round of discussion with 120 girls and 5 teachers to understand the issues. The findings were the lower secondary schools are mostly affected as they are attaining age during these ages from 10 to 13. Their education performances, participation in sports and cultural events are minimized. Socially and culturally, people are not very comfortable to discuss these MHM matters. But from the initial stages itself, it was realized that MHM is more than just providing disposal bins and sanitary napkins. In the next slide, I will talk about the birth of Participatory MHM Kit. To make a conducive environment to discuss on MHM matters, the Provincial Department of Education and UNICEF decided to develop a toolkit. The experts on participation techniques were involved for the development of the kit kit containing 7 steps. In the next slide, I will explain what are there in the kit for the first step. There are 4 major communities in Sri Lanka and their cultural practices towards puberty ceremonies varies. The displaying cards were produced among the participants to discuss about the puberty ceremony. This is to make the participants to ease to discuss further along MHM lines. Let's discuss about the step 2 in the next slide. Under step 2, there was an analysis on several feelings. The discussions mostly leads to that feelings are common among boys and girls, but boys rarely reveal it. In the next slide, the discussion were towards the cultural beliefs and taboos relating to MHM. The general myths which were existing in a certain community were placed and discussed in this step. The major aim is to discuss on how to overcome the taboos which were affecting schoolgirls, attendance and performances. While dealing with this, in the next slide, the discussion goes to food myths. The aim is to identify essential foods which were needed for girls were being avoided by a certain community. By analyzing this, corrective actions can be taken in later stages. In the next slide, the analysis is who is really affected by improper MHM. It is only schoolgirls, the analysis reveals not only the girls are being affected by improper MHM, other school-based members also affected if MHM is not handled correctly. The maintenance issues comes to principal's shoulder. Teachers finding difficult to catch up the competency levels due to the irregular attendance of girls. In the next slide, it explains the ways and means to identify school-based solutions for the existing issues. School children, teachers and principals were asked to identify reasons, solutions within their boundaries of power in this step. The feasible solutions were developed with timelines and implemented. There are certain activities which cannot be done with the local resources. In the next slide, the development of action plan was discussed. In this step, developed action plan was implemented. There are certain activities which can be done by girl child, school hygiene club, teachers or principals, while some can be developed by the school development authority. Some actions need more resources which need to be done only by the Ministry of Education, as more resources are needed for such type of activities. So in the next step, the development of action plan was discussed, submitted to Ministry of Education for fundraising to address such issues. In the next slide, I have displayed some photographs made so far. The first photograph from the left shows the launching of wash-in schools for girls under 3-star approach. The second photograph shows the girls' participation of developing action plan under MHM concept. The third one displays the group photograph taken just after the MHM trainers training was completed. In the next slide, the successes so far made were discussed. The successes so far made were the selected schools including MHM in their regular school development plans for future interventions. There was one advocacy point narrowed down, and it is to tackle girls to drink a very little amount of water during menstruation. This was addressed with the health experts such as visiting obstetrician and gynecologist and reproductive health officials. The next success is the Provincial Health Ministry linked with migrated Sri Lankan doctors in America for establishing community-based sanitary napkin production units. Even though there are successes, there are challenges too also. In the next slide, I am going to discuss some of the challenges. One of the challenge faced was most of the school principals are men and need major mind shift to address the issue in school level. The second challenge is the knowledge and access to information in urban schools and rural schools are not equal. The third challenge is most of the myths are in rural setup and strongly rooted. The next step, we plan under this approach to evaluate MHM program to improve the participatory MHM kit before mainstreaming and scaling up further. In the next slide, I have put up the content details for future contents. Thank you.
So we're just going to read some of the comments. There's been a lot of commentary coming in on the chat box. Since Radika is not, unfortunately, online, so we can't actually ask any questions. Murat, did you want to make an announcement about Sri Lanka first?
Yeah. Last week there was a week-long gathering under the leadership of Minister of Education in Sri Lanka. There were 16 countries present, partners from the country delegations led by the Ministries of Education from all those 16 countries. It was from India to Pacific Islands. And one of the key discussions at the assembly was menstrual hygiene management. It's amazing on the ownership of Ministries of Education. The Minister of Education from Sri Lanka, he himself attended at the opening, at the end, and the meeting was hosted by the Ministry of Education. So it shows, a room full of 100 plus, participants from 16 countries, and they agreed to follow up menstrual hygiene management for its incorporation into curricula, for its incorporation on the national education sector plans in those 16 countries. So next year they will be meeting in Indonesia. Indonesian government will be hosting. So it shows the great work that Sri Lanka team has been doing, the Ministry of Education, on MHM. Unfortunately, Radika is in the field and she was not able to log on due to low bandwidth, but it was great to have her recorded session.